Have you ever had that moment where, for just a few seconds, the entire world treated you like you didn't belong? Amara Lewis had that exact moment right in the middle of a luxurious first-class cabin, with a ticket worth tens of thousands of dollars in her hand, just because of the color of her skin, just because someone believed their privilege was more important than the truth. But adversity sometimes opens another door, a door that forces us to choose stay silent for safety or stand up for dignity. Just think about it. If someone blatantly threw your things on the floor, looked at you like an intruder, and tried to push you out of your own place, what would you do? Would you stay silent and let it pass, or would you assert your worth? Even though the entire compartment was full of prejudice, and the more important question, if it were you, would you be calm enough to defend yourself without losing your kindness? Come join us as we embark on a true story of self-esteem, inner strength, and an unexpected turnaround. If the story touches you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to continue this journey with us. The yellow lights of Newark Liberty Airport stretched like a thin strip on the dark carpet. It was almost 9 p.m., the hour when young people wanted to go home, and those who had been working for many years just wanted to sit down peacefully, let their tired shoulders fall into a soft chair, and wait for the flight to take them away from a long day. Amara Lewis stood silently in front of the large glass doors of Terminal C. Outside, the tarmac glistened with water. The first rain of the season had just swept through, leaving the air thick with the smell of jet fuel and humidity. She turned her hand slightly, touching the silver AI bracelet on her left wrist, a device she had developed herself, what federal security officials called the third eye of American aviation. But tonight, Amara didn't want to be CEO. She just wanted to be a 32-year-old woman exhausted from 6 days of meetings in Washington, her mind slowly sinking into the rare calm of waiting. She blinked, then slung her charcoal backpack over her shoulder. Inside were the papers she was to present at the Energy Security Conference in London, a meeting every media outlet was waiting for. It was said her speech could change the way airlines protect American skies. Just get through tonight's flight. She sighed and stepped into the first-class lounge. The lighting was softer than outside. The smell of lightly roasted coffee and the hum of the espresso machine creating a relative silence. A few businessmen still had their laptops open. Others were reading newspapers or leaning back in reclining chairs. And then, the sound came. A female voice rang out, sharp and disapproving, not loud, but the kind you'd hear at high society charity parties where polite smiles hide veiled judgment. I can't believe this. This is a first-class lounge Amara didn't need to look to know what kind of person it was. The kind of person she had met too many times. But the female voice continued, without lowering its volume. I swear the quality goes down a notch every year. Last week was fine. But today, oh my God. A sharp sound of pages being flipped, all unfamiliar faces. I wonder what the company is thinking. Amara shivered slightly. She made a habit of ignoring such mumblings. But a few eyes around her unconsciously glanced at her and quickly looked away. They were unintentional, but Amara understood that feeling better than anyone, the feeling of being unwanted in these places. She tried to focus on her phone, opening her calendar, checking her documents, but the sound of high heels clicking loudly on the floor pulled her out of her thoughts. A white woman in her 50s, with old-fashioned bouffant hair, a beige tweed dress, and a large handbag. Her posture was so straight it looked as if her spine were cast from cold metal. Linda Montgomery. Amara had never met her, but she knew her type, the type of person who could make others feel small with just a glance. Linda was standing at the bar, frowning. What is this champagne? Not the one I ordered. This place is terrible right now. The waiter tried to smile, but his eyes were a little tired. Amara looked at them, her heart aching. She had been a waitress in college. She knew those smiles. Linda continued to grumble. Then her eyes happened to glance at Amara. Just a second, but enough for Amara to recognize that look. A look that had made her swallow tears as an intern at a tech company in Boston, when she was turned away from a conference room because they thought she was a delivery person. A look she thought she had overcome. But it turned out it was just sleeping, waiting to be awakened. Amara turned away, not wanting to care. She just needed to get on the plane. She just needed peace, just for the evening to be over. About 5 minutes later, the loudspeaker announced boarding for first-class passengers. Linda immediately stood up, pushing her large bag and walking with determined strides, even pushing past an elderly couple trying to get in line. Amara bowed slightly, allowing them to pass, before slowly gathering her things. She always boarded last, less crowded, less noisy, less hassle. She pulled her backpack, walked out of the waiting room, and walked along the corridor leading to gate number 71. The air conditioner hummed, the fluorescent lights were cold, and the line of people seemed endless in the hallway. In that moment, Amara suddenly remembered her mother, the words she had said, when Amara was a startup and was publicly snubbed by an investor. Amara, you don't have to go looking for a place to stand. Just stand up straight. Your place will appear. She smiled slightly. Her mother always spoke softly, yet strongly enough to lift her heart. She entered the cabin of Flight 482 London. The smell of new leather, the soft yellow lights of the first-class cabin, the flight attendants greeting each passenger, the luxurious oak walls. Just a few more steps to seat 2A. Just a few more steps to sit down. Just a few more steps to begin the peaceful journey. But that peace had not yet formed. Because standing right in front of seat 2A is Linda Montgomery. And Linda was looking straight at Amara as if she saw something completely wrong. "Sweetheart," Linda said, her voice sweet but sharp as a knife. "It looks like you're sitting in the wrong seat." Amara paused. Her hands tightened on the straps of her backpack. Here it goes again. The thing she didn't want, but still found her like fate. At that moment, the cabin seemed to fall silent. No one knew that this silence was just a premonition of the coming storm. A storm would force the entire flight to land on land. A storm that would change the lives of both women. A storm that the press would later call the Newark incident. And it all started with a chair. Amara stood silently in the narrow first-class aisle, looking at the face of the woman blocking seat 2A, the seat that was the only place she wanted to sit after 6 consecutive days of black coffee and suffocatingly stressful meetings. Linda Montgomery crossed her arms, her eyes scrutinizing Amara as if her presence were some unworthy mistake in the world. "Sweetheart, this is not your place," Linda repeated, her voice as firm as if she were declaring law. Amara swallowed softly. No one else heard it, but it echoed loudly in her heart, the sound of exhaustion every adult was familiar with. She kept her voice soft. "I think this is 2A, right? This is my seat." Linda tilted her head, a half-smile appearing on her lips, full of disdain. "Oh, honey, maybe you saw wrong. First class isn't always easy to understand for newcomers, new people." The phrase was sharper than the words said. It was spoken politely, but there was a world of meaning behind it. Amara tried not to react. She had lived with these words all her life. From school, where kids looked at her second-hand shoes and laughed, to the office as an intern, where a coworker looked at her curly hair and asked indecently, "Are you sure you're in the right meeting room?" But no experience could have prepared her for the moment at age 25 when an investor asked her exactly one question in front of 15 middle-aged men. "Are you sure you understand technology? I think women of color are better at customer service." 6 years have passed since then. Aegis Dynamics is now a multi-billion-dollar company. She is on Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. She consults for government security. She protects America's skies with her own technology. Yet tonight, with just a look, a voice, and an innocuous remark, that feeling from when I was 25 returned the feeling of being judged solely by the color of my skin and my silence. Amara leaned over and gently lifted her backpack so no one would accidentally step on it. The flight attendant walked over and was about to speak when Linda raised her hand first. "She's in the wrong seat," said Linda. "I don't know what class she's in, but it's definitely not first class. This is my seat, and I booked it 3 months ago." The flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, her face tired but still polite, turned to Amara with an apologetic look. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Amara nodded, raised her phone. The screen clearly displayed 2A, first class, flight 482, Lewis. Amara. Chloe glanced down and then back at Linda. "Mrs. Montgomery, what is your boarding pass?" Linda looked at her boarding pass, but didn't show it. She just lifted her chin. "I told you. I always sit in 2A. Don't make me call my husband." Chloe took a deep breath, her eyes flashing with fear, the very real fear any airline employee feels when faced with a powerful passenger. Amara saw that, and that was when her restraint began to tremble like a taut string. Not anger, not pride, just frustration. Frustration that the same thing kept happening over and over again, no matter where she rose. She sat down gently, put her backpack on the chair, her voice calm as if she was talking in a quiet cafe. "Mrs. Montgomery, this is my chair. I don't want to argue. I just want to sit down." Linda laughed a cold, shallow laugh. "Oh, honey, I'm not arguing. I'm just letting you know your limits." Chloe stuttered. "Mrs. Montgomery, there must be some mistake. Let me check." Linda didn't let her finish. She yanked Amara's backpack off the chair, pulling hard enough that the zipper popped open a little, revealing the small black metal box inside Aegis Dynamics' top-secret security device. It was a small sound, but it made Amara's heart jump. "You can't." Before she finished her sentence, Linda threw her backpack on the floor. "Don't make me repeat myself. Go back to your place." There was a loud thud as the backpack hit the floor. The surrounding customers turned around. Chloe froze. Amara looked at the backpack lying on the floor as a testament to the most blatant and obvious disrespect she had encountered in months. In that moment, a moment that seemed to last only a moment, a lot of things came to Amara's mind. Her father, who taught her to stand tall in every situation. Her mother, who always reminded her not to lose herself just because others didn't see her worth. Her vulnerable 25, her 30s filled with responsibilities she never thought she'd have, and her 32s with their long nights, speeches, and national security projects. It all came back like a film reel. And then a very special stillness appeared within her. Not resignation, not anger, but clarity. Amara bent down to pick up her backpack. She shook the dust off, checking to see if the equipment inside was intact, and when she stood up, she looked at Linda with eyes that were neither hard nor soft, but rather the eyes of someone too tired to remain silent. She said, her voice low, slow, clear, "You just crossed the line." No one in the cabin understood the full meaning of that statement. No one knew that the limit was not just Amara Lewis's personal limit, but also the limits of a system, a society, a reality she had fought her whole life. And that night, that boundary was about to be torn apart. Linda Montgomery stood straight as a steel pillar in the middle of the first-class cabin, her shoulders back, her chin lifted unconsciously. It was not the stance of a confident person, but the stance of someone who had lived her whole life in a position of comfort to the point of taking comfort for granted. People like Linda don't think they're doing wrong. They just believe the world works in a way that serves them. And it started long before she boarded Flight 482. Linda Montgomery was born in a wealthy suburb of northern Iowa, where the streets were swept clean of leaves every morning and the white picket fences were painted every spring. Her father owned the largest trucking company in the area. Her mother had been a state beauty queen. Linda grew up coddled and expected the world to open its doors when she knocked. She grew up in a private school where students didn't have to worry too much about grades, because a smile from their parents at parent-teacher conferences meant everything was okay. She attended equestrian clubs, charities, and adult cocktail parties where she was allowed to stand next to them, hearing about big plans for the city. Linda is not a bad person, but she was raised in an environment that made her forget that all people are equal, and that forgetfulness grew over the years. At age 30, Linda married Aaron Montgomery, an ambitious lawyer who later became a state senator. Their lives became a whirlwind of politics, banquets, fundraising, and almost weekly first-class flights. The airline considered the Montgomerys diamond customers. Linda took it like it was breathing, like it was right. She was used to being given priority, used to others giving way, used to everyone bowing their heads just by saying, "My husband is Senator Montgomery." There was only one thing no one knew. Linda carried a simmering insecurity, an insecurity she never admitted, fear of being forgotten. Linda was not a high achiever. She was not a politician, a business owner, a scientist, or a creator of great value. She was the woman behind a successful man. That was the role she had been assigned, and she clung to that feeling of being seen with all her might. Wherever she went, she asserted her position by raising her voice a little, walking a little faster, and looking at others with a slightly stronger judging gaze. It was Linda's way of protecting herself from a secret fear, the fear that, if she didn't prove herself, she would be nothing. When Linda saw Amara in the waiting room, the discomfort that came to her wasn't just from discrimination. It came from something deeper. She saw a young woman, dressed simply, not wearing any obvious brand names, her face calm to the point of being formidable. There was something about Amara that made Linda feel suddenly threatened, the kind of feeling people used to standing on high ground often experience when meeting someone who is actually stronger than them. Of course, Linda didn't realize that. She just felt uncomfortable. And to Linda, dislike means not right. Back in the cabin, standing in front of seat 2A, Linda felt many eyes on her. Some looked awkwardly. Others tried to avoid her gaze. In Linda's mind, that meant everyone agreed with her. Everyone understood that she was right. Linda turned her wrist, lifting her chin a little more. Her voice was even sweetheart. "It's just a small mistake, but you don't want to mess things up." It sounded like advice, but it was actually a command. Amara was silent for a beat, and the silence made Linda uncomfortable. She was used to people reacting quickly or shrinking back in fear, and Amara's calmness made her feel like she was being shined a light where she didn't want anyone to see. "Mrs. Montgomery," Amara said softly, "I respect you, but I cannot give up my seat." Linda laughed. "You call that respect? You're too young. This is first class, not a bus." The words fell like ice. A few passengers rolled their eyes. Chloe clenched her notebook. Linda felt like she had scored a point. It was a small victory, but she needed it. In that moment, Linda failed to see what others saw so clearly. Amara was not weak. She was not one to be intimidated, nor was she one to stand idly by when a limit was crossed. But more importantly, what Linda never imagined is that Amara represents more than just herself. She represents many who have gone through the same thing. Those who have endured, those who have swallowed their anger, those who have been pushed out of their positions because someone else felt entitled to make the decisions. In that small cabin, Linda thought she was fighting a young girl. But really, she was confronting a life of pride that Amara had built from old wounds. When Linda threw her backpack on the ground, she didn't think much of it. For her, it was just an act of restoring order. But little did she know that the backpack contained something that belonged not just to Amara, but to the entire nation. An inadvertent act, a spontaneous act, a moment of lack of control, will be the cause of the downfall of her entire life later on. Chloe bent down to pick up Amara's backpack, her voice trembling. "Miss, I'm sorry." "Let me," Linda immediately interjected. "No need to apologize. She should thank me for showing her the right place." Then Linda turned back, looking at seat 2A as if it were her own throne. "This chair is mine, and will always be mine." A simple statement, but it was the final straw. In a moment, it will flare up into a storm that will ground the whole flight, and in a moment, no one in the cabin would look at Linda Montgomery the same way again. Before Amara and Linda stood face to face in first class. The events of that evening were actually planted earlier right in the first-class lounge of Terminal C. Not everyone notices the small moments, but it's the small moments that determine the direction of the entire night. About an hour before boarding flight 482, the first-class lounge was neither too noisy nor too quiet. It was the kind of place where everyone tried to be polite. But everyone was in their own tiredness. Businessmen frowned at charts. Couples argued quietly. A few people hugged laptops typing the last lines of the workday. Amara walked in with a simple backpack. She chose a corner seat, near the glass doors overlooking the runway. The reflections on the glass created streaks of light in the darkness of the night yard. She had not sat down long when the sound of high heels clicked loudly on the marble floor. A sharp, dry sound filled with artificial power. Linda Montgomery appeared like a cold wind in the already calm atmosphere. She pulled her expensive suitcase and walked straight into the lounge. In her hand was the latest model phone, with a gold rim, the object she always held up as a signal of social status. Linda flicked her hair, her eyes darting around the room as if checking to see if the place was big enough for her to sit down. Amara glanced at it, then looked down at the email. She was used to people like that. Linda walked to the bar, picked up a glass of champagne, took a sip, and immediately grimaced. "Oh my God! This is Moet! Don't tell me this is the standard kind." The counter clerk, a young girl around 22-23, smiled slightly, trying to explain. "Yes, ma'am. Our company is using Moet Grand Reserve." Linda interrupted. "Grand Reserve. I drink that all the time. This isn't it. It's too sour. Who ordered it?" Her voice was loud enough for those sitting nearby to hear. A Hispanic gentleman sitting next to her narrowed his eyes as if to hide his embarrassment. A middle-aged woman shook her head slightly, but Linda thought that silence was consent. She turned around, her eyes accidentally sweeping over Amara, who was sitting in a corner, wearing a simple black coat, her hair tied back, and carrying nothing expensive except a small metal bracelet on her hand. Linda's eyes stopped for a single second, a second long enough to reveal everything. His eyes said, "You don't fit in here." Amara saw, but she didn't react. She just shrugged and told herself, "Not tonight. I'm too tired to care." She turned back to her phone screen, reading the email her assistant sent her with the completed version of tomorrow's speech. But Linda still wasn't satisfied. She started a loud phone conversation, not caring who was listening. "Aaron, you know what? The lounge is terrible today. It's full of people, with no clear class. I don't understand why the airline would lower the standards like that. Unknown rank." Amara narrowed her eyes. The phrase was familiar. She'd heard it whispered when she was the only black girl in her advanced placement class. She'd heard it when she'd been hired at her first tech company. She'd heard it when she'd been promoted ahead of some of the others. The phrase was more than a comment. It was a knife slash across the very thin surface of self-esteem. Amara took a deep breath. She knew she had to stay calm. A CEO couldn't afford to lose his inner balance, especially in public. But deep inside, the old wound oozes again. Softly, but very real. Linda continued speaking loudly on the phone. "No, you don't understand. This waiting room used to be full of people like us. Now anyone can get in with a few extra points. People like us." Again, two small words, but they have the weight of a stone dropped into a pool of water. They spread circles that no one wants to look back at. Amara was about to stand up to change seats when an elderly woman sitting nearby tilted her head and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Amara's smile was light, like the last ray of sunlight of the day. "I'm fine. I'm used to it." The woman looked at her with pity in her eyes. "You shouldn't be used to something like this." The statement stabbed Amara in the chest, not because it hurt, but because it carried a stark truth. Amara had tried to believe that success would free her from eyes like Linda's. But it turns out, success only changes the air pressure, and the storm remains the same. About 20 minutes later, the boarding announcement sounded. "First-class passengers, please prepare to board." Linda stood up immediately. Without looking at anyone or asking permission, she pushed her suitcase and walked forward, pushing past the two elderly people standing at the door. "Excuse me, ma'am." "We're waiting in line," the wife said softly. Linda turned back. "I am Diamond Elite. I have priority." The husband could only sigh. Amara stood far back, watching the scene with a strange weariness. She was not angry, nor was she surprised. She just felt sad, the gentle sadness of growing up, knowing that some people will never look beyond their familiar selves. When Amara stepped out of the lounge, Linda was already down the long hallway. The wheels of her suitcase still echoed somewhere ahead, monotonous, rigid like the old memory of someone who had lived a life of privilege. Amara slowed down, letting Linda walk away. She wanted to keep herself in peace before the long flight. But as soon as she saw the electronic board showing the words Gate 71, boarding, Amara suddenly felt like something was wrong, even though she couldn't name it. Just a feeling, like a cold wind blowing across the back of my neck, like a small premonition, like a warning sign. Little did anyone know. In a few minutes, just a few minutes, that feeling would become the centerpiece of an event that America would talk about for weeks. An event that started with a simple quote from Linda Montgomery's sweetheart, "You're sitting in the wrong seat." And now, in the lounge, the sour champagne smell that Linda complained about earlier still lingered in the air, like a scent reminding that sometimes what makes people stumble is not the great disaster, but the illusion they have nurtured all their lives. The walk from the waiting room to Gate 71 was longer than usual, or maybe it just felt that way to Amara. The smell of industrial carpet mixed with the cold air conditioning, the steady rolling of suitcase wheels, and the white light from the ceiling reflected off her face, making her tired eyes look even deeper. On the left, the posters appeared a woman in a blazer stepping off a plane. The words, Fly with confidence. Amara smiled faintly. Tonight, she did not feel confident at all. She just wanted peace. Up ahead. Linda Montgomery was standing near the boarding gate, talking to a ground staff member, her voice high and steady as if she were lecturing something. I need to make sure the cabin is ready. I always sit in seat 2A. Please keep an eye out. The ground staff nodded, the faint smile of someone familiar with VIP contact. Amara walked slowly, keeping her distance. She didn't want to run into anyone tonight, especially anyone impatient. But life had a way of throwing people into unwanted situations. As the staff scanned her boarding code, Amara heard a soft bing and stepped onto the jet bridge. The air inside vibrated. The smell of metal and humidity reminded her of the nonstop flights she'd had while developing the Aegis system flights, where she'd written code and dozed off in her seat. She placed her hand on the cold metal, hoping this trip would go smoothly. Stepping into the first-class cabin, Amara immediately noticed the difference. The smell of fresh leather, the soft yellow light, the sound of oak as the doors slid gently. The space was minimalist but warm, every detail reflecting the desire to bring privacy to each passenger. The flight attendant stood at the door, a tall, brown-haired man whose name tag read Evan. His voice was calm. "Welcome, Ms. Lewis. Your seat is 2A, right up front." Amara nodded, smiling slightly. It was a small smile, but Evan immediately saw the weariness in her eyes. "Do you need me to help you put your luggage away?" "No, I'm fine," Amara said. She walked down the aisle, feeling like she was just a few breaths away from seat 2A. Just a few steps, and she could sit down, buckle her seatbelt, close her eyes. But the world still doesn't want her to have it that easy. As soon as she approached 2A, a familiar figure appeared, like a door blocking her longing to rest. Linda Montgomery was standing right in the aisle. She turned around at the sound of footsteps, her sharp eyes as if assessing every feature of Amara's face before she spoke. "Sweetheart," Linda said, her voice trailing off meaningfully, "you've come to the wrong place." Amara paused. It seemed like a minute. She didn't want to react right away. She needed to breathe. She looked at the shiny wooden walls, at seat 2A with its large screen and enough space to lie down. She looked at Linda standing right in front of the seat door. A strange feeling crept into her heart. Not anger, but like someone seeing a familiar problem presented to her again, years after she thought it had been solved. 2A's mine, Linda said again, but this time in a lower, assertive tone. I usually sit here. I booked it 3 months ago. The staff here knows that. Evan, the flight attendant who had just stood at the door, approached with a tense look. "Mrs. Montgomery, let me double-check." Linda raised her hand to stop him. "I don't need to check. I know where I am. She should be the one checking." Amara slowly opened her phone and gave Evan the boarding pass. 2A, Lewis, Amara. Evan looked down at the screen, then back at Linda Madam. "Please show me your boarding pass." Linda slightly raised her chin. "No need. I told you. 2A is always mine." Chloe, the young flight attendant Amara had met earlier, stepped forward to help. She leaned over to look at the seating arrangement screen, then turned to Linda and said softly, "Mrs. Montgomery, your ticket is 6E." The sentence was simple, but it fell on the cabin like a stone dropped on a calm lake. Linda blinked. "What did you say, 6C?" "Ma'am," Chloe repeated. "Here's your ticket." "No, it can't be. I never sat there. I didn't sit in row 6. I never." Linda pulled her phone from her purse and opened the boarding pass app. The light from the screen reflected off her face, and at the same time, something in her eyes seemed to change, from frustration to confusion for a moment, then immediately back to anger. She doesn't accept being wrong. Never. Linda slammed the phone shut, as if the device itself had betrayed her. The app crashed. Today was a bad day. She snapped. Think about it. I've been flying this route for 10 years. I always sit in 2A. I'm a Diamond Elite. I get to pick my seat. I booked it months ago. She pointed at Amara must have gotten it wrong. A few passengers behind him started to pay attention. A man in a suit whispered, "Is it about the seats again?" Amara remained still, her expression unchanged. But the hand holding her backpack strap tightened. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want to argue. She just wanted to sit down. Chloe patiently, Ms. Montgomery. The system is correct. Your ticket clearly says 6C. If you would like to change your seat, we can assist you once all passengers have boarded the plane. Linda laughed a cold, contemptuous laugh. Support? No. I don't need support. I need my chair. And she looked Amara up and down. Shouldn't have been sitting there in the first place. A very small sentence, but enough to thicken the air around. Amara heard every word. And what hurt her most wasn't the words. It was the way Linda said them as if they were completely normal, completely right, in that moment. Amara had a fleeting thought, like a small shadow passing through her mind. If I stay silent, will it end? But immediately. Another memory came flooding back, the memory of her standing in the middle of class at age 17 when a teacher asked her in front of the whole school, "Are you sure you're in the right advanced class?" She remembered that feeling, the feeling of being scrutinized, judged simply by her presence, and she remembered her mother's words, "Don't be silent anymore. Silence never protects you." Amara raised her head. Her voice was soft, but not trembling. "Montgomery, this is my seat. I paid for it. I have a boarding pass. I expect you to respect that." Linda glared. "Didn't you hear me?" The cabin was silent. Evan looked at Amara, then at Linda, then said in a more serious tone, "Mrs. Montgomery, I must ask you to step back and let passenger 2A sit down." Linda grinned. "You better be careful. I can call." But the words had not yet formed. Then Linda reached out and grabbed the strap of Amara's backpack. Again, at that moment, everything seemed to slow down. Amara's eyes widened. Chloe whispered, "No, don't." Evan reached out to stop it, but too late. Linda yanked her backpack and bag. It fell to the floor again, and this time, the metal box of the Aegis Dynamics cracked open more clearly. A corner of the device hit the floor with a sharp sound like metal breaking. A small sound, but it carried farther than any sound that evening. Evan paled. Chloe covered her mouth with her hand. A passenger turned to the person next to her. Something happened. Amara bent down to pick up her backpack. Her hands were shaking, not with anger, but with fear of what was to come. She muttered, almost loud enough for herself to hear no. "Don't let this happen." But it all has already begun. The sound of the metal box hitting the floor was not loud, but it created a heavy silence. It was as if the first-class cabin, which had been filled with footsteps and the soft sound of leather seats, had suddenly been completely sucked away. Amara bent down to pick up the backpack, her fingers shaking slightly. Not from anger, but from the familiar dread that came with messing with something related to her work, especially the one in the metal box. The device inside wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a weapon, but it did contain highly encrypted data, the core of Aegis's simulation control system. A crack, a dent, or a misalignment. Anything could go wrong. Linda, of course, didn't understand. She didn't even bother to look down. She just smirked slightly. as if throwing other people's things was a normal thing for her class. "You dropped it," Linda said coldly. "You can't even keep your things. Yet you want seat 2A. Evan immediately stepped forward, his voice as tense as a bowstring. "Mrs. Montgomery, please do not touch other passengers' luggage. It is against safety regulations." Linda crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Safety? Are you saying I'm a safety threat? Do you know who I am?" Amara stood up, hugging her backpack to her chest. She closed her eyes for a second, just enough to calm herself down. But calm did not mean silence. When she opened her eyes, her voice was low and very clear. "Mrs. Montgomery, I ask you not to touch my things again." Linda laughed. "Request, honey. Someone in my position doesn't take requests from people like enough." Evan interrupted, his voice louder than usual. That moment made Linda stunned. No one, especially the flight attendant, had ever dared to interrupt her like that. Evan took a deep breath and continued in a controlled voice. "Miss Montgomery, for the safety of the flight, I request that you return to your proper area immediately. If you continue to cause disruption, I will be forced to notify the captain." A few first-class passengers began to lean out of their cabins to observe. A couple looked at each other and whispered, "Looks like something big is happening." Linda didn't care. She went straight to seat 2A, plopped down, and crossed her arms over her chest. "I'm sitting here. You guys do whatever you want." Amara stood frozen, not in shock, but in sadness, the kind of sadness that lasted for years, every time she was looked down upon, measured by someone else's warped standards. Evan Quee sang Amara Miss Lewis. "I'm so sorry. I'll take care of this. Could you stand back for a moment?" Amara nodded, backing into the aisle, not because she was weak, but because she understood Evan was trying to salvage the situation in a way that would cause the least harm to the crew. But Linda didn't leave things alone. She looked at Amara with a victorious look, as if she had just placed the right piece on the board. "Sweetheart, just listen to me. First class isn't just a ticket. It's standards. The standard falls with a heavy weight like a rock." Chloe stepped forward, her voice as light as mist, but Amara heard a tremble in it. "Mrs. Montgomery, if you do not leave your seat, we will be forced to call the purser and the captain down to handle the situation according to regulations." Linda turned to Chloe, speaking in a tone like she was teaching a child who had done something wrong. "You think I'm scared? You think a little flight attendant can kick me out of my seat?" Evan called softly, "Chloe, back off. Let me—" But Chloe didn't back down. She summoned her own courage, the kind that service people sometimes take years to find. "Ma'am, this is not about the seat. You have touched a passenger's luggage, which is prohibited by federal law. I ask for your cooperation." Linda jumped up from her chair, her face red. "Federal law? You're threatening me with federal law. Do you know what my husband does?" Evan stepped between the two. "Mrs. Montgomery, this is your final warning." Linda smiled faintly. "When I should be the one warning you." The small speaker turned on purser, "Please report to first class." The atmosphere in the cabin began to change from awkward to clearly tense. Passengers around them started pointing their phones forward. Some turned on their cameras, but tried to keep them hidden so as not to get too involved in the drama. In the cabins of the rich, everyone understands the unwritten rule. If there is trouble, come back. Then see who is wrong. Amara didn't want to be in anyone's videos. She wanted to retreat to the wall. She wanted to hide from everyone's eyes, not because she was afraid, but because she knew she had been through this too many times. "Why does everything have to happen like this?" she asked, closing her eyes. A weariness crept into her chest. It didn't come from Linda. It came from 32 years of being a black woman in rooms where her presence was always considered out of place. Purser entered a man of military build whose name on the board read Marcus Hale. His voice was deep and firm, very different from the soft tones of the previous crew. "What's going on?" Evan spoke quickly, detailed, and clearly as a report. Passenger Linda Montgomery was sitting in the wrong seat, refused to move, and twice touched and dropped passenger Amara Lewis's luggage. Marcus Quee sang, "Linda Mrs. Montgomery, I need you to stand up and return to your chair." Linda put her hands on her hips. "No, this is my seat. Either they made a mistake or the app is broken. I'm not moving." Marcus nodded, the very small nod of someone preparing to take the matter up a notch. He spoke slowly, each word like tapping on the air. "Montgomery, I am asking you to cooperate with FAA regulations. Do you understand the extent of this?" Linda immediately replied, "I'm FAA. My husband is on the National Security Committee." Marcus looked at her for a second, then turned to Amara, "Miss Lewis, are you okay?" Amara was silent for a few seconds. She wanted to say, "I'm fine." She wanted to say, "I'm okay." But she wasn't okay. Not when someone had just thrown her things on the floor twice. Not when basic respect was being stolen in front of other people. She said the truth, in a small but not weak voice. "I need safety. I need respect. And I need things to be done right." The statement was soft, but hit home. Marcus turned to Evan and Chloe. "Please close the cabin. Stop boarding. I will notify the captain." Linda jumped up. "What are you guys doing? Stopping the whole plane, just because of this girl. Ridiculous." Evan said, "Not because of her, because of your actions." A murmur began to spread through the cabin. A man whispered, "There's already drama before we even fly." Another person, "I knew it. Something big is about to happen." Amara heard it all. The words combined to form a pressure that pressed down on her back. Part of her wanted to let it go. Wanted to say, "It's okay. Let her sit. I'll change chairs." Wanted to be left alone. But another part, the part that had been insulted at 17 at 25, and tonight stood up inside her and said, "No, we can't keep silent any longer." Amara sighed, forcing a tired smile. "Oh, if only things never had to go this far. But things are just beginning." And in minutes, one sentence from Amara would silence the entire plane and set off an event that would have the whole country talking for weeks. The cockpit door swung open gently, accompanied by the click of the magnetic lock, signaling the drama was about to reach its climax. Captain Ethan Ward stepped out, a man in his 50s, with neatly cropped gray hair and the sharp features of someone who had spent decades flying across the Atlantic in all kinds of weather. He wasn't the grumpy type, but anyone who flew with him knew when Ethan stepped out into the cabin, there was real trouble. The atmosphere changed instantly. The passengers stopped talking. Everyone's eyes turned to the front of the cabin. Someone put down their phone instinctively, knowing that this moment was more serious than just a video recording of a drama. Ethan glanced at Marcus, then Evan, then Amara, all in a matter of seconds, but enough for him to read 70% of the truth. "All right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "What's going on here?" Linda immediately jumped to her rescue. "Captain Ward, thank goodness you're out. Finally someone with authority. These people are insulting me, kicking me out of my seat," and Ethan raised his hand, stopping her words like stopping a rushing stream. "Mrs. Montgomery, I'll listen to you, but I'll listen in order." Marcus Hale Purser stood up straight, his voice clear as if he were reading a safety report. "Captain, here is the situation. Passenger Linda Montgomery was seated incorrectly, refused to disembark, and twice touched and dropped the luggage of passenger Amara Lewis. We asked for cooperation on multiple occasions, but Ms. Montgomery did not comply. Linda exhaled. "Oh my God, you guys are exaggerating. I just reminded her that this was my seat. The airline's ticketing app was broken. I'm a Diamond Elite. I always sit in 2A. Amara remained silent. She wanted to let the process speak for itself. Ethan looked at Linda for quite a while. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Linda raised her phone. The screen lit up. The boarding pass was clearly displayed Montgomery. "Linda, seat 6C, Diamond Elite." Captain Ethan said softly. "6C, not 2A. Linda shook her head. "You don't understand. I always sit in 2A. It's an error. I'm not leaving here." Ethan looked straight ahead. His eyes were not angry, but sharp as a ray of light piercing through fog. He spoke slowly, each word clearly as if counted. "Ms. Montgomery, this is not a matter of preference or habit. This is a matter of FAA and of flight discipline. We do not operate on I always have. We operate on a matter of regulation." Linda opened her mouth to object, but Ethan continued, firmly, "If your boarding pass says 6C, then your seat is 6E. Space seemed to hold its breath. In that moment, Linda felt for the first time in her life that someone was refusing to bow to the familiarity of authority around her. The feeling unsettled her. Amara stood still. She saw Linda tighten her grip on her purse, saw a panic in her eyes that she had probably never seen in herself. Amara was not happy, not gloating. She saw only a corner of humanity hidden behind the luxurious coat, a corner so small and so easily knocked down when privilege was taken away. Ethan stepped closer to Linda, his voice low but not harsh. "Mrs. Montgomery, I understand you're used to some priorities, but on an airplane, everyone is equal. And most importantly, no one is allowed to touch another passenger's luggage." Linda frowned. "I just pushed it out a little." Amara shook her head slightly. "She threw it. She said—" Her voice wasn't high, just a matter-of-fact statement. Captain Ethan turned to Amara, his eyes warm but serious. "Miss Lewis, I'm sorry that happened." Linda rolled her eyes. "Why should you apologize to her? I didn't do anything serious. She's just exaggerating. It's just a small bag." Ethan looked straight at Linda. "She didn't know what was in it." "And it's just a bag is no excuse," Amara said slowly. "It's a federal-grade simulator. If it breaks, my business trip is at risk. And maybe a lot of other things are at risk, too." Linda took a step back. Her eyes changed bewildered, uncertain, defensive. "How would I know you didn't say—" Amara wanted to laugh, but she wasn't happy enough to laugh. She didn't ask. She replied. Ethan turned back to the entire crew. "Boarding is suspended. I need to contact my supervisor and the airline directly." Linda jumped up. "What did you do that for?" "For her, for a bag." Ethan looked at her for a long time, the eyes of someone who had witnessed too many events in the sky. Then he said the first sentence that made the whole cabin freeze in silence. "Because this is no longer about a bag. This is about a passenger interfering with the security of the flight." A few passengers gasped. A man whispered, "Oh my God, it's over." Linda squeezed the strap of her bag so tightly that her fingers turned white. "You're threatening me. Threatening me with the word security. I have a husband in the Federal Security Committee. I'm not the kind of person who threatens me like you." A moment of silence. Amara looked her straight in the eyes. Marcus immediately stepped up. "Mrs. Montgomery, I ask you to stop talking immediately." But Ethan raised his hand. He wanted to hear everything. He needed to hear it to get it right. Linda took a deep breath. Her voice lowered but sharper. I just wanted to sit in my seat. She was in the wrong seat. I was just trying to make room. That's all. Amara looked down at her backpack, then up at Linda. You said make room, but that's not your place, Amara said, her voice still calm. Linda replied immediately. You don't understand. I was always there. I was there for years. Ethan tilted his head, his eyes no longer filled with anger, but with deeper observation. Mrs. Montgomery, he said softly, are you holding on to a chair or something else? The question was like a blackout in the cabin. Linda opened her mouth, but couldn't speak. For the first time in her life, standing at the pinnacle of familiarity and power, she was asked exactly what she had never dared to think of. Ethan continued, his voice low. No one is taking your place. It's just, he glanced at Amara, then back at Linda. The world does not revolve around seat number 2A. Linda blinked rapidly. For a moment, she almost looked smaller. Her breathing was ragged. Ethan said firmly, Ms. Montgomery, per airline and FAA regulations, uncooperative passengers will be asked to deplane. Linda immediately replied, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving here. I have the right to stay. No, Ethan replied, you have no right to cause trouble. Silence. A silence as thick as a blanket fell over the entire cabin. Ethan continued, I'll call airport security for assistance, and we'll get everyone off the plane if necessary. Murmurs broke out. A passenger exclaimed, Unbelievable! Another person growled, I have to go to London tonight for work. Please don't say it's postponed. Linda turned around and shouted angrily, You blame me, it's her fault. She sat in the wrong seat for me. Amara shook her head slightly. No, I'm not sitting wrong, she said, her voice as calm as a lake. You just won't accept the truth. Captain Ethan nodded. I'll call the company right now. Everything stops here. Linda Quee sang Ethan. You will have to explain to my husband, Ethan. Calmly, I will explain to the FAA and to the airline. And you will have to explain to yourself. Amara stood aside. She wanted peace, but now peace was no longer an option. She gripped the strap of her backpack tightly. Her heart was beating steadily, as if preparing for what was to come, something that even Amara did not expect. Just one word was about to escape her lips. It would bring the entire flight to a standstill and make America look back at itself. As soon as Captain Ethan Ward finished speaking, the first-class cabin fell into a heavy silence. Not an awkward silence. It was the kind of silence that comes when there are big moments when everyone knows what is about to happen will go beyond a simple argument. Linda Montgomery stood motionless. Her face was red. Her eyes were bulging. Her breathing was rapid, like someone backed into a corner. She was not used to this feeling of being stopped, challenged, forced to face the truth. Amara stood a few paces away, no longer retreating, no longer silent, just standing straight, shoulders square, backpack clutched to her chest as the only shield between her and all the eyes in the cabin. No one knew that a silent battle was going on in her mind at that moment, a battle between the restraint she had cultivated over the years and the truth she had suppressed for so long. Marcus Purser stood right next to Ethan, looking straight at Linda. He no longer had his previous look of confusion. Now his eyes held the attitude of someone who knew that if they backed down tonight, neither of them would stand again. Evan and Chloe stood close together, like a small protective barrier. Both eyes were on Amara, not for instructions, but as if to say, We're here. And then, it was Linda who broke the silence. Fine. she growled. "Call security. I'll tell them everything. My husband knows who you are. You dare throw me off the plane. I'll make the whole airline apologize." She turned to Amara and pointed straight at him. "And you will have to explain why you dared to sit in my chair, daring to slander me in front of everyone here." Several passengers in the back gasped. They could see the outrage, but no one said anything. Ethan shook his head slightly. He had seen many difficult passengers, but none like Linda Montgomery, a person clinging to power as a last lifeline. He said slowly, "Mrs. Montgomery, no one is slandering you. There are cabin cameras. There are crew statements. There are boarding passes." Linda shot back. "I'm not wrong." Amara breathed a sigh of relief. She knew the moment had come to tell the truth. Not because she wanted revenge, but because if she didn't, she would be betraying herself and the years she'd worked to get to this place. She took a step forward. The whole cabin turned its gaze toward her. Chloe instinctively raised her hand to her chest, holding her breath. Evan clenched his pen. Marcus stood still, not interrupting. Amara looked at Linda, really looked, without contempt, without fear. She said in a low, soft voice, but it was very clear, "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm not taking your seat. I'm just sitting in a seat I paid for. But you're not looking at your boarding pass. You're looking at me. And you've decided that I can't sit here." Linda opened her mouth to protest, but it was too late, because Amara continued, "It's not the chair. It's not the system. It's because you think I don't belong here." A heavy air filled the room. Ethan closed his eyes briefly for a second. Marcus took a deep breath. Evan looked at Amara with obvious respect, and Chloe, her eyes were red. Linda took a half step back, as if the statement had been thrust directly into her. I didn't say that," she stammered. "But you think so," Amara said. Her voice wasn't accusatory, like someone naming an old wound as gently as possible. Linda shook her head vigorously. "You're making things up. I just want my seat." Amara did not raise her voice. She simply unzipped her backpack and took out a small black zip-up bag. Inside was the Aegis Dynamics Metal ID, a card with an internal identification chip that only federal personnel had. She gave the ID to Marcus and Ethan. They both looked at each other, and their eyes changed instantly. The black titanium ID plate reads Aegis Dynamics, Federal Simulation Division, Level 4, Clearance and below. The name Amara Lewis, Chief Executive Officer. Ethan let out a soft breath. "Oh my God!" Linda blinked. "What? Does that have to do with anything?" Amara replied. "Yes, it is, because you didn't just touch my bag. You touched the equipment I have to take to London to sign off on with Homeland Security tomorrow." A sound of someone's hand lightly slapping a forehead came from behind the cabin. If this device had a problem, the entire aviation security program would have been delayed. Dozens of training flights would have been delayed. Materials would have had to be re-inspected. Millions of dollars in damage. And you threw it. Twice. Linda turned pale. Her hands shook. "No, I don't know. I just want you." "Give her your seat," Amara said. "Not because of the seat. Because she thinks someone like me shouldn't be sitting here." The anger in Linda died down. It was replaced by a kind of small collapse, like someone realizing they had stepped too far over a line without even realizing it. Ethan said, for the first time in a serious tone, "Ms. Montgomery, you have tampered with federally issued supplies. That is within security. I cannot and will not allow you to remain on this plane." Linda gasped. You can't fire me." Marcus replied, "Can and must. No, you can't. I'll sue." "I have acquaintances," and Amara gently interjected. her voice not high, but as hard as velvet-clad steel. "You may know a lot of people, but tonight, no one can defend your actions." A passenger in the cabin sighed and said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is not a matter of acquaintance. This is a matter of conscience." Linda looked around, but there was no one to defend her. No one avoided her gaze. No more of the soft power she used to use to bully others. Only the truth remains cold, straight, and very clear. Ethan took the walkie-talkie and said, "Call security at Gate 71. Request assistance removing uncooperative passengers from the aircraft." Linda shouted, "No, you don't know what you're doing. You're ruining my career." Amara spoke very softly, loud enough for only Linda to hear. No one ruined her career. She ruined it herself. The words made Linda choke. It was as if a mirror had been held up in front of her, forcing her to look at what she had been avoiding all her life. Minutes later, when airport security entered the cabin, Linda Montgomery was still standing there, shaking, gasping for breath, her hands clutching seat 2A like someone clutching the last piece of herself. But rules are rules. The two employees said gently but firmly, "Mrs. Montgomery, please come with us." And before the eyes of 30 first-class passengers, hundreds of passengers behind her, and millions who would later see this video, Linda Montgomery was removed from the plane's cabin. In the cabin, Amara Lewis stood still, not happy, not gloating, just a little sad. The sadness of someone who understands that sometimes to change something wrong, one must be willing to be the one to break the truth before everyone's eyes. And at that moment, Captain Ethan lowered the radio, turned to Marcus, and said something that made the whole cabin hold its breath. "We'll have to consider canceling the trip." Linda Montgomery had just been escorted out of the first-class cabin by security. But instead of relief, the entire cabin seemed to be in a state of no one dared to breathe heavily. The plane doors closed behind the security team. There was a tense silence, as if everyone knew this wasn't the end. Amara stood next to seat 3A. She didn't sit down, not because she was tired or because she wanted to prove anything, but because the cabin felt like a place where every breath she took carried a responsibility she never chose but had to bear. Ethan Ward, the captain, stood still in front of the first-class cabin door. He looked at the small panel on the wall. Flight delayed 42 minutes. You know, in the airline industry, a 42-minute security delay is no small matter. He turned back to look at the crew. "We need to check the entire cabin before closing. It's mandatory procedure." Marcus nodded slightly and turned to Evan and Chloe. "Check the aisles, overhead bins, and the violation area. Double-check seat 3A and the area before that." Amara stood still, silent, not because she was afraid of damaging the equipment. She knew it was well sealed, but because she was worried. The entire flight was paying an unnecessary price because of one man's aggression. A man behind him, about 40, white shirt, loose tie, spoke up. "Excuse me, but does this mean, are we really going to be canceled?" His voice was not loud, but enough to make others look up. A middle-aged woman added, "I have an 8. Meeting in London tomorrow. I've missed 3 flights this month. If this one gets canceled, I don't know how to explain." An old man in seat 2G sighed softly. "I flew to London to see my niece for the first time. I had been looking forward to this trip for 3 months. The whole cabin began to murmur, not blaming Amara, but worrying about the future of the flight. Amara heard everything. Her chest felt heavy as if a rock was pressing down on it. She bowed her head slightly. She never wanted to be the reason someone else was hurt. That feeling hurt her in a way no personal attack could. Ethan walked closer to her and whispered, "Miss Lewis, it's not your fault. I need you to remember that." Amara looked at him. For the first time, she let out a deep breath as if allowing herself to express her exhaustion. "Captain, I understand the rules, and I respect flight safety, but if this causes the flight to be canceled, I really don't want it." Ethan shook his head. "Not yet, but we have to assess the risk. The crew witnessed dangerous behavior, and you are a passenger carrying federal supplies. We cannot take this lightly." Marcus stepped up from behind, his voice small but firm. "Miss Lewis, you are not the troublemaker. The troublemaker has been taken out, but everyone saw how she touched your backpack. It was a security breach. We cannot just pack and fly on like nothing happened." Amara nodded slightly, not denying, but inside, she was having a struggle reason. "This is the process. I can't make an exception for myself. Heart. There are 200 people behind. They are not guilty." A woman's voice rang out, gentle but firm. "You did the right thing. Don't blame yourself." Amara turned to see an older black woman sitting in seat 4A. She smiled sadly. "We have been silent for too long. For you to say it like that, many of us have never been able to." The words made Amara pause. They hit a deep place where old memories, things she had never told anyone, still lay. Ethan returned to the crew, starting final checks. "I'll go to the cockpit and update dispatch." He left the cabin, leaving the air as if it had been drained of half its calm. 10 minutes later, Marcus returns. "The captain will be meeting with operations in 15 minutes. We are not closing yet." Murmurs arose. A tall man in seat 1D asked Marcus, "Honestly, what are the chances the flight will be canceled?" Marcus looked around. His expression was guilty but not dismissive. "I can't say exactly. But when there's an incident involving tampering with security materials, the company always has to consider it." The whole cabin sighed in varying degrees. Chloe glanced at Amara. She wanted to reassure him, but didn't know what to say. Evan walked up to Amara, his voice sincere. "I know no one wants this to happen, but if the flight is canceled, don't feel like you have to take responsibility for anyone else." Amara was silent for a long second. A second long enough for her insides to split in two. "One branch wants to say I'm okay. I'm used to it. The other branch is more real. I'm tired. I just want to sit down and fly to where I need to go." In the end, she chose the one closest to the truth. "I don't want the flight to be canceled. Not just for me, but for everyone." Evan placed his hand on her shoulder, a small but respectful gesture. "So please believe that we are doing our best to make this flight happen." Then a new voice rang out from the hallway between the cabins. "I think it's better if you get taken off the plane." The whole cabin turned around. A man about 60 years old, salt and pepper hair, light gray vest, stepped out of the business chair. No one recognized him, but Marcus did, and his face paled considerably. Mr. Caldwell Ethan came out of the cockpit at the same time, heard that name, and also stopped. Because Thomas Caldwell was no ordinary passenger. He was a Federal Aviation Administration commissioner, one of the most powerful voices in air safety decisions in the United States. "Mr. Caldwell adjusted his tie, looking straight at Amara Miss Lewis. "Is it Amara?" calmly replied. "Correct." He nodded. "I know you. I know Aegis Dynamics, and I know how important the supplies you carry are." Ethan stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, we are processing the procedure." Caldwell raised his hand, signaling he understood. Then he said something that made everything stop. "If I were the airline, I wouldn't let this flight take off." No one said a word. Caldwell continued. "It's not your fault. Miss Lewis, But when a federal security device is thrown to the floor by another passenger, even once, every potential risk must be taken into account. Therefore, in my opinion, this flight should be canceled. The cabin fell silent as the horizon fell. Amara looked at Caldwell, not angry, not blaming, just a deep sense of loss. Marcus swallowed. Ethan stood straight, his expression as tense as a bowstring, and just when everyone thought the decision was clear, Caldwell added, "However, I know who is suffering the most in this matter." He looked straight at Amara. "It's you." Another layer of emotion crossed Amara's eyes. Caldwell continued, "I know why you must go to London, and I know no business trip will get you there in time." He paused for a moment. Then he said something that shocked the whole cabin. "So, I will propose to the airline another option, not to cancel the flight, but to transfer you to a federal vehicle?" Marcus gasped. Chloe covered her mouth. Evan turned to Amara as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Ethan blurted out, "You mean FAA plane?" Caldwell nodded. "I'll call right away, if Miss Lewis agrees." All eyes turned to Amara. She stood there motionless, speechless, with what was pounding in her chest. She had never asked for privileges before, but for the first time, someone was willing to give them to her for a good reason. And the story suddenly takes a turn that no one could have predicted. No one in the first-class cabin, including Captain Ethan Ward, had ever seen an FAA commissioner step in and ask to directly intervene in a passenger's journey. Not because it hadn't happened before, but because it had only happened when the issue had gone beyond the reach of a single airline. Mims. And that moment was unfolding before the eyes of more than 30 first-class passengers of Flight 482. Thomas Caldwell stood in front of the row of seats, his figure slender, but his voice enough to fill the entire compartment with absolute silence. He reiterated the proposal. "I will contact the coordinator to arrange for a private federal vehicle to take Miss Lewis to London that very night. But the decision is still yours." The whole cabin held its breath. No one dared to interrupt. Even Marcus, who always kept his cool in any situation, took a few seconds to swallow his tension. Amara looked at Caldwell. Her gaze wavered slightly, not from fear, but because the offer offered an escape route she was not prepared to take. She asked softly, "Why? Did you do that? Why do you want to help me?" The question was so real, and the waiting room was so real, that you could hear the air conditioning fan. Caldwell did not answer immediately. He walked slowly toward Amara, keeping a respectful distance. "I have followed Aegis Dynamics' work for many years," he said. "You and your team have helped stabilize the airline industry after its most difficult period. I know your value." Amara tightened her grip on her purse. She wasn't used to compliments like this, especially not when they came in a stressful situation. But Caldwell wasn't done yet. "And," he added, "I am also a man of color. I know the look you got from that woman. I have seen it hundreds of times in my life." A slight gap opened in the room, not a heavy silence anymore, but a very human understanding, the kind rarely expressed in words between people who seemed like total strangers. Ethan stood behind, listening to every word. He bowed his head slightly, as if in silent sympathy. Caldwell continued, "I can't change the way the world treats us, but I can make sure that tonight you won't suffer any more losses." Amara took a deep breath. Part of her wanted to agree immediately. She was too tired from the tension that had lasted for nearly an hour. But another part, the strongest and most principled part of her, wasn't ready to leave like a nuisance. She lowered her eyes a bit, then looked up and asked, "If I leave this flight, What happens to the rest of the passengers? Will the flight continue? Caldwell didn't answer. He looked at Ethan. Ethan replied firmly, "Honestly, if you leave, the chances of us taking off are much higher. The violation situation regarding the disruptive passenger has been dealt with. The only remaining issue is your equipment and the reevaluation regulations." But then Ethan did something unexpected. He spoke the truth without concealment, without evasion. "And Miss Lewis, the airline doesn't want the flight canceled. Nobody does." Amara nodded slightly. She had guessed that. Caldwell said if you leave by federal transport, your equipment will be treated as security. You will still make it to London on time, and this flight will most likely continue. The whole cabin turned to Amara. No one said anything, but their eyes were filled with hope. Not the hope of privilege, but the hope of returning to the life they're putting on hold the life outside this plane door. Amara looked around the first-class cabin. A man sits in a chair in the first floor, head in hand, seemingly recalling tomorrow morning's meeting schedule. A young mother holds her sleeping baby in her arms, trying to calm him down. An elderly woman clutches her rosary beads. A group of engineers whisper to each other about the morning survey. She saw clearly no one deserved this situation. And then she finally spoke. "If I leave the plane, I don't want anyone to think I'm getting preferential treatment. I don't want anyone to think the airline is doing this to cover up the incident." Her voice was low, soft but firm. "I want everyone to understand that. I chose to leave because I respect everyone's time on this flight." The whole cabin seemed to let out a sigh, but no one intervened. Amara continued, "But I will only leave if the airline guarantees flight safety for this flight and ensures that my leaving does not turn into a distorted story." Caldwell chuckled, not mockingly, but respectfully. "You are the CEO." Ethan smiled gently. "You are thinking of everyone else when you are the one who is hurt the most." Amara did not deny it. She simply said, "I don't want anyone to come home late just because of me." Caldwell nodded vigorously. "I'll handle everything. You have my word. No one is allowed to twist this story." He pulled out his phone and walked to a corner of the cabin to contact FAA dispatchers. Marcus stood near Amara and whispered, "Miss Lewis, thank you." Amara was surprised. "For what?" "For not choosing revenge," Marcus replied. "Others in your situation would have done something very different." Amara sighed softly. "I don't want to win anyone, Marcus. I just want things right." Just a few minutes later, Caldwell returned. He announced, "The federal plane is taking off from Hangar 4 in 15 minutes. The escort vehicle is approaching Gate 71. Ethan nodded. "We'll let Miss Lewis off the plane in 5 minutes. And then we'll go through the security checklist. If everything's okay, we'll take off." A sigh of relief spread throughout the cabin. Chloe covered her mouth with her hand as if trying to hide her joy. Evan put his hand to his chest and nodded. Marcus looked at Amara with the warm eyes of someone who had just witnessed the truest thing all day. Amara just bowed her head, accepting the fact that her choice had brought hope back to everyone. When the cabin doors opened, no one clapped, no one cheered. They stood or simply bowed slightly as a sign of respect. An old man whispered, "You saved this flight. Thank you, Miss Lewis." Amara simply replied, "I just did what I thought was right." And she walked down the stairs of the plane, where 2 federal agents were waiting. In the cabin, Ethan watched her back, then said to Marcus, "Not everyone who has been treated unfairly can walk like that." Marcus nodded. "She's not just strong, she's the type of person who makes others want to do better." And as the plane doors closed, Ethan turned back to the cockpit, letting out a long breath. Okay. Checklist from the beginning. We're flying. The flight is saved. An outraged CEO becomes the only one who chooses to sacrifice herself to keep 200 passengers safe. And what no one knows her choice is only the beginning of a bigger battle that awaits. The night air at Newark Airport was colder than usual, though there was only a slight breeze that cut through the gap between the plane's stairs and the ground. Amara walked down the steps, her shoes clicking lightly against the metal, making a steady, resonant, but unhurried sound. Behind her, 2 federal agents followed not for protection, but as a proper escort. In the distance, the flashing lights of a black federal sedan waited. An agent opened the back door and bowed slightly. "Miss Lewis, please, we must leave now to connect with our flight schedule." Amara nodded. She sat in the soft leather seat and closed the car door. The quiet interior, the lingering scent of new leather, seemed to hold her in place amid the emotions that were spreading. The car rolled out of Gate 71 and into the quiet night of the runway. Amara leaned her head against the glass door. For the first time in over an hour, she let herself let out a proper sigh. All the pent-up emotions in the first-class cabin now rose up like a late wave. Not angry, not hateful, just tired. Tired of years of having to prove myself better than others. Tired of trying to stick to my principles no matter who pulled me down. Tired of always being strong when my heart just wants to be a little weak. She closed her eyes. This night is really too long, she thought. The agent sitting in the front seat looked through the rearview mirror and asked softly, "Miss Lewis, are you okay?" Amara opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "It's fine. Just a bit much at once." The agent nodded slightly, as if understanding that it was the simplest of dozens of possible answers. "The federal plane is ready. When it arrives, you will be taken directly to the entrance stairs." Amara asked. "How long?" "About 7 minutes." She nodded, her hand resting on the black equipment bag lying beside her, the bag of federal supplies that Linda Montgomery had thrown to the floor without a thought. She touched it as if touching her heart, a fleeting feeling of sadness because of one person's moment of prejudice. All of her efforts, her teams nearly went off the rails. But she pursed her lips and said to herself, "It's okay. I'm still on track." The sedan passed a large hangar and turned into a designated driveway marked Federal Aviation Operations, Hangar 4. The large roll-up doors were open. Inside, the FAA's silver Gulfstream G700 sat still, its taillights blinking softly as if waiting. Amara got out of the car. The air in the hangar was warmer, the smell of jet fuel mixed with the sound of giant fans from the ventilation system. A man in a purple suit walked up. "Miss Lewis, I'm Deputy Director Hughes. I'll be in charge of your flight tonight." He extended his hand, shaking Amara's with just the right amount of respect, not formal, but not too much. "Thank you for coordinating so quickly," Amara replied. Hughes shook his head. "We have more to thank you for. The simulations Aegis provides have saved us many times." Amara didn't reply. The compliment made her feel awkward, though it was sincere. They walked up the stairs leading to the federal plane. Inside, the cabin is smaller than commercial, but many times more luxurious cream leather seats, walnut cabinets, soft yellow lighting like evening in a peaceful living room. Hughes signaled for the flight attendant to close the door after Amara placed the equipment bag in the safety compartment. "If you want to rest, there's a small cabin in the back," Hughes said. Amara shook her head. "I want to sit here for a moment." She chose a seat by the window. The plane shook slightly, a sign that a technician was checking the engine. "The plane will take off in a few minutes." Amara placed her hand on her forehead, then down to her chest, a gesture she often made when she needed to steady her emotions. Too many changes tonight, she thought. But just then, the small door leading to the cockpit opened. A young female pilot stepped out. "Miss Lewis," Amara looked up. "Yes." The pilot smiled and stepped closer. "I know this isn't the place for a personal conversation, but I just wanted to thank you." "Thank me," Amara was a little surprised. "Yes," said the pilot. "I was one of the first Aegis simulator trainers. Without your program, I wouldn't have qualified for the FOO." Her voice was small and soft, but her eyes were full of determination. "What you did tonight, a lot of people saw it. Not everyone can stay calm in the face of such prejudice. You showed us how to respond properly." Amara bowed her head slightly. This was something that touched her heart deeply deeper than the insults she had suffered. "Thanks," Amara said softly. "But I'm not trying to set an example. I'm just trying to keep myself. Usually, the one who keeps himself is the one we want to follow the most," the pilot replied, returning to the cockpit. The door closed, leaving a silence. Amara smiled slightly, a small, relieved smile. For the first time tonight, she felt she was not alone. Hughes sat down in the opposite seat and put on his seatbelt. He opened his tablet, checked the passenger list. There was only one name, Amara Lewis, Federal Priority Transport. He looked up and asked, "Do you want to know what happened on that commercial flight?" Amara tilted her head slightly. "What's the matter?" Hughes showed her the tablet. On the screen is an internal FAA bulletin. "Flight 482, status final security check underway. Expected takeoff in 18 minutes. The airline has acknowledged the incident and sent an initial report to the FAA. The captain and crew are temporarily marked as acted by protocol." Hughes said, "You leaving the flight is not mandatory, but it helps them continue with the process without pressure from you." Amara understood immediately. Not because she's CEO, not because of the federal equipment, but because she left in a way that retained her autonomy. That makes it easier for airlines to protect their crews. Amara leaned back in her chair, feeling warm. Hughes continued, "But there's one more thing I think you should know." "What?" Amara asked. Hughes tilted the tablet again. A cabin camera from Flight 482 captured a passenger, an elderly black woman in seat 4A, standing up and speaking to the cabin after she left. She didn't run away. She chose to help all of us. Amara felt her heart touched, not because of the words, but because of the truth behind it. She had no words to reply. There was only a warm feeling slowly spreading into her chest. For the first time in a long night, Amara felt understood, a way very few people do. The plane shook slightly. Hughes said, "We take off." The cabin lights turned a pale yellow. Amara looked out the window. The runway was long and straight, its light streaking across it like stars close to the ground. She closed her eyes as the plane accelerated. In that moment, she thought, "This trip, perhaps there are many things waiting for me ahead." And she knew a new chapter had just begun, not just hers, but that of those who had stood up for her, and those who had seen what was right in the darkness. The Gulfstream G700 skimmed through the last thin layer of cloud before descending into London. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, a gray-blue covering the horizon, the sun still hiding behind the skyscrapers of Canary Wharf. Amara opened her eyes as the plane shook slightly, signaling the plane was entering approach. In that moment, she felt like her mind was pulled back to reality. After a long night filled with events, emotions, and unanswered questions, she stretched her shoulders and raised her hand to rub her temples. Her nap in the recliner wasn't long, but it felt strangely comfortable, as if she could sleep because she knew she was temporarily safe. Deputy Director Hughes stepped out from behind the cabin, a tablet in hand. "We'll be landing at London City Airport in 12 minutes, he said. "The British Security Service cars are waiting." Amara nodded. "Thank you." "Hughes?" He smiled. "I'm just doing my part. But there are a few things you should probably know before we hit the ground." Amara tilted her head slightly. "What is it?" Hughes opened the screen. There was an updated internal bulletin board, and the first line made Amara pause. "Inquiry opened. Incident involving federal-level equipment on commercial Flight 482. Amara frowned, just because my backpack was thrown, but the device is still intact. Hughes exhaled slowly. "I know, but rules are rules. And yesterday's story isn't about the cabin anymore." He lowered his voice. "The video of the woman throwing her backpack went viral." Amara squeezed the armrest. She had expected this, but she didn't expect it to happen so soon. "How far?" she asked. "Everywhere." Hughes replied. "And don't forget, Harrison Montgomery is a senator. This isn't just a passenger causing trouble on an airplane. This is a political, racial, power-driven event. And you, the one carrying federal documents, are right at the center." Amara was silent for a long beat. She had no regrets about how she had handled it, but she knew clearly power has two sides. And when it touches political interests, the country will never be at peace again. She asked, "What does the FAA want me to do?" Hughes shook his head. "Not the FAA, the British government." Amara looked up. Hughes' eyes hardened. "Miss Lewis, you didn't just fly over to sign off on the simulation system. Someone from the British Home Office wants to see you. Tonight?" Amara's breath hitched for a second, not from fear, but from the feeling that things had just gotten a lot more complicated than she'd thought. The plane touched down on the London City runway, as smoothly as a feather. Amara held on to the edge of her seat, steadying herself as the plane slowed. Through the window, she saw the morning mist swirling around the water of the Royal Docks, the glass buildings reflecting the early morning light, and the London skyline gradually becoming clear like a still picture. As the cabin door opened, a blast of cold London air rushed in the city's signature dampness, mixed with the fog and steel smell of the airport. Two British agents approached, solemn but polite. "Good morning, Miss Lewis. Welcome to London." Amara nodded slightly. She followed them down the plane stairs and into the waiting black Range Rover. Hughes stood on the stairs watching her, his eyes unable to hide the worry he didn't want to show in front of her. The car rolled out of the airport and into the quiet streets of East London. London was slowly waking up. A light drizzle fell on the car windows, the tiny drops forming long streaks. Amara looked out. She loved the cold, damp London. It reminded her of the mornings she used to come here as a young engineer, attending inspections where no one knew her name. That day, she thought to herself, I just needed to prove my ability. Today is different. Today, she has more to prove. Arriving at the Blackwell Regency Hotel, the car door opened. An English receptionist bowed. "Your room is ready, Miss Lewis." The room was on the 19th floor, overlooking the Thames. Amara entered, placed her bag of equipment on the table, and leaned back in her chair. But before she could breathe, her phone vibrated violently. Recipient, Deputy Director Hughes' message. "Call me. Urgent." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She called back. "Hughes, what's wrong?" His voice was low and tense. "Miss Lewis, I just received more information, and you need to prepare yourself mentally." Amara squeezed the phone. "Speak." Hughes hesitated for a second, rare for an FAA official. "There are reports that the woman who caused trouble last night did not act alone. Amara frowned. What do you mean? Hughes spoke slowly. Clearly she is associated with a political lobby group that opposes the expansion of the aviation security simulation program. This group believes that the technology provided by Aegis will displace traditional personnel and affect their interests. Amara stood up. Are you saying that the incident on Flight 482 might not have been accidental? Hughes replied. We don't conclude that. But the Home Office wants to see you because they suspect a connection to a recent string of incidents in the European region training systems being disrupted, simulation data being accessed without authorization. Amara felt her heart turn cold, not because of fear, but because this was no longer a case of discrimination on an airplane. It was drawing in a greater darkness, one she had seen signs of for months, but never thought would erupt at such a moment. So, she said, her voice low, what do they want from me? Hughes replied, they want to know whether the Aegis system is being targeted. Amara sat down on the edge of the bed. The truth just dawned on her clear and sharp as a knife. If they're right, if someone was trying to hack the simulation, then Linda Montgomery attacking her on the plane may not have been entirely random. A chill ran down her spine. Hughes said the last sentence. Miss Lewis, prepare yourself. Tonight's meeting could change everything. Amara put the phone down on the table. The room was quiet. There was only the sound of rain tapping lightly on the window. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, the feeling of having been dragged into a battle she couldn't escape. She knows this. When technology begins to impinge on power, resistance will be more than just threats. It would come in ways she didn't expect, like a seemingly harmless backpack toss. She opened her eyes and looked down at the black bag of equipment. Tonight, she said softly, we must go straight to the heart of the matter. And she stood up, shoulders straight, chin up. Her usual strength returned stronger than last night, because Amara Lewis never backed down from anything that threatened what she believed was right. And tonight, London will know it. The Gulfstream G700 skimmed through the last thin layer of cloud before descending into London. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, a gray-blue covering the horizon, the sun still hiding behind the skyscrapers of Canary Wharf. Amara opened her eyes as the plane shook slightly, signaling the plane was entering approach. In that moment, she felt like her mind was pulled back to reality. After a long night filled with events, emotions, and unanswered questions, she stretched her shoulders and raised her hand to rub her temples. Her nap in the recliner wasn't long, but it felt strangely comfortable, as if she could sleep because she knew she was temporarily safe. Deputy Director Hughes stepped out from behind the cabin, a tablet in hand. We'll be landing at London City Airport in 12 minutes, he said. The British Security Service cars are waiting. Amara nodded. Thank you, Hughes. He smiled. I'm just doing my part. But there are a few things you should probably know before we hit the ground. Amara tilted her head slightly. What is it? Hughes opened the screen. There was an updated internal bulletin board, and the first line made Amara pause. Inquiry opened. Incident involving federal-level equipment on commercial flight 482. Amara frowned, just because my backpack was thrown, but the device is still intact. Hughes exhaled slowly. I know, but rules are rules, and yesterday's story isn't about the cabin anymore. He lowered his voice. The video of the woman throwing her backpack went viral. Amara squeezed the armrest. She had expected this, but she didn't expect it to happen so soon. How far, she asked. Everywhere, Hughes replied. And don't forget, Harrison Montgomery is a senator. This isn't just a passenger causing trouble on an airplane. This is a political, racial, power-driven event. and you, the one carrying federal documents, are right at the center." Amara was silent for a long beat. She had no regrets about how she had handled it, but she knew clearly power has two sides, and when it touches political interests, the country will never be at peace again. She asked, "What does the FAA want me to do?" Hughes shook his head. "Not the FAA, the British government." Amara looked up. Hughes's eyes hardened. "Miss Lewis, you didn't just fly over to sign off on the simulation system. Someone from the British Home Office wants to see you. Tonight." Amara's breath hitched for a second, not from fear, but from the feeling that things had just gotten a lot more complicated than she'd thought. The plane touched down on the London City runway as smoothly as a feather. Amara held on to the edge of her seat, steadying herself as the plane slowed. Through the window, she saw the morning mist swirling around the water of the Royal Docks, the glass buildings reflecting the early morning light, and the London skyline gradually becoming clear like a still picture. As the cabin door opened, a blast of cold London air rushed in the city's signature dampness, mixed with the fog and steel smell of the airport. Two British agents approached, solemn but polite. "Good morning, Miss Lewis. Welcome to London." Amara nodded slightly. She followed them down the plane stairs and into the waiting black Range Rover. Hughes stood on the stairs watching her, his eyes unable to hide the worry he didn't want to show in front of her. The car rolled out of the airport and into the quiet streets of East London. London was slowly waking up. A light drizzle fell on the car windows, the tiny drops forming long streaks. Amara looked out. She loved the cold, damp London. It reminded her of the mornings she used to come here as a young engineer, attending inspections where no one knew her name. That day, she thought to herself, I just needed to prove my ability. Today is different. Today, she has more to prove. Arriving at the Blackwell Regency Hotel, the car door opened. An English receptionist bowed. "Your room is ready, Miss Lewis." The room was on the 19th floor, overlooking the Thames. Amara entered, placed her bag of equipment on the table, and leaned back in her chair. But before she could breathe, her phone vibrated violently. "Recipient Deputy Director Hughes' message. Call me. Urgent." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She called back. "Hughes, what's wrong?" His voice was low and tense. "Miss Lewis, I just received more information, and you need to prepare yourself mentally." Amara squeezed the phone. "Speak." Hughes hesitated for a second, rare for an FAA official. "There are reports that the woman who caused trouble last night did not act alone." Amara frowned. "What do you mean?" Hughes spoke slowly. "Clearly she is associated with a political lobby group that opposes the expansion of the aviation security simulation program. This group believes that the technology provided by Aegis will displace traditional personnel and affect their interests." Amara stood up. "Are you saying that the incident on Flight 482 might not have been accidental?" Hughes replied. "We don't conclude that. But the Home Office wants to see you because they suspect a connection to a recent string of incidents in the European region training systems being disrupted, simulation data being accessed without authorization." Amara felt her heart turn cold, not because of fear, but because this was no longer a case of discrimination on an airplane. It was drawing in a greater darkness, one she had seen signs of for months, but never thought would erupt at such a moment. "So," she said, her voice low, "what do they want from me?" Hughes replied, "They want to know whether the Aegis system is being targeted." Amara sat down on the edge of the bed. The truth just dawned on her clear and sharp as a knife. If they're right, if someone was trying to hack the simulation, then Linda Montgomery attacking her on the plane may not have been entirely random. A chill ran down her spine. Hughes said the last sentence. Miss Lewis, prepare yourself. Tonight's meeting could change everything. Amara put the phone down on the table. The room was quiet. There was only the sound of rain tapping lightly on the window. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, the feeling of having been dragged into a battle she couldn't escape. She knows this. When technology begins to impinge on power, resistance will be more than just threats. It would come in ways she didn't expect, like a seemingly harmless backpack toss. She opened her eyes and looked down at the black bag of equipment. "Tonight," she said softly, "we must go straight to the heart of the matter." And she stood up, shoulders straight, chin up. Her usual strength returned stronger than last night, because Amara Lewis never backed down from anything that threatened what she believed was right. And tonight, London will know it. The closed-door meeting ended just after 10 p.m., but Amara felt like she was on her second shift. She followed the agents out of the Home Office building and into the London night air, damp, cold, but strangely quiet. She didn't go back to the hotel right away. She needed time to think, and more importantly, she needed to piece together the chain of events. The Range Rover took her back to Blackwell Regency. Floor 19, room 1904. A large space, but so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Amara put her coat on the chair, turned on the desk lamp, and opened her laptop. Her reflection on the screen showed her tired but alert eyes. She knew if the man who appeared in Newark was indeed the one from Harbor 12, he hadn't just followed her by chance. "There's a reason," she thought, "and it's not the airplane seat." She pulled her chair closer to the table and opened the encrypted secret folder that only she and Aegis' senior security team had access to. A map appears, redline attack points in the past 6 months. Washington, Frankfurt, Oslo, Liverpool, and now Newark, from above. These scattered points seem meaningless, but Amara doesn't believe in meaninglessness in the realm of technological security. She zoomed in on the map and switched to international flight routes. Green zigzags appear the world's busiest flight routes. Then she stopped. One flight path, the North Atlantic Corridor, stands out in the middle of the map, and the intersection of all the attacks isn't on land, but located in the center of the transatlantic flight route, where hundreds of flights depart and return every day. Amara whispered, "It's not a coincidence." She pulled up a second layer of data, the locations of NATO simulation training centers. The points appeared. Just as she suspected, there was a disturbing overlap between the attacks and the data links used to train civilian military simulations. She leaned back in her chair. The puzzle pieces are starting to come together, and it's not pretty. The phone vibrated. Caller named Sir Jonathan Hale. Amara pressed, "Listen, Sir Jonathan." His voice rang out, unable to hide the urgency. "Miss Lewis, are you awake? I am working with data." "Good. Because we just got more information, and it's complicated." Amara focused immediately. "Any more clues about who was following me last night?" "Yes. We have extracted additional cameras from the Newark Airport security area." His voice dropped. "That man didn't go alone." Amara clenched the phone. "What does that mean?" Jonathan said he was traveling with 2 other people, and all 3 used boarding passes registered under the names of deceased individuals since 2019. Amara closed her eyes. This was no longer an anti-technology group. This was organized, very organized. Jonathan said, "But there's something else. You need to know right now." There was a heavy silence for 3 seconds. Camera footage captured the 3 of them, standing in the pre-boarding area, looking at her before the woman even approached to provoke her. Amara opened her eyes. That sentence was like putting the final note on a picture she didn't want to complete. Linda Montgomery was not a spontaneous troublemaker. She was provoked, or set to provoke. Amara shivered. "You mean They intentionally created the accident. Jonathan replied, more than that. The report shows Flight 482 was targeted, not to blow up, not to hijack. He stopped. Then he said a sentence that made Amara sit up straight. They wanted to create chaos to see how the security system would react, especially the Aegis equipment she carried. A cold wind ran through Amara's chest. She asked, "Why the device I carry?" Jonathan replied in a serious voice. "Because that device, if it were to be compromised, could cause a breach in the international flight security simulation chain. And if they were to exploit that vulnerability, they could cause a whole series of simulations to produce erroneous data." Amara hissed softly through her teeth. "Not a real system, but a training system for hundreds of pilots. If the simulation is wrong, the pilots will be wrong too, even if they don't know it. It is a disaster on an international scale." She thought to herself, "They didn't attack my system. They attacked the future of safe flight for the entire world." Jonathan asked, "What are you thinking?" Amara looked at the map on the laptop, her voice low but strong. "I was thinking, they're not just after me. They're after Aegis. And if they succeed, the global airline industry will collapse. On the other end of the line—" Jonathan was silent for a few seconds. Then he said something Amara did not expect Miss Lewis. "There's one more thing. Anything else? We know this group is preparing a new attack, and the target is London." Amara stood up. "Is it tonight? No, but very soon. And since you're here, they can speed up." Amara gripped the edge of the table. The air in the room seemed to thicken. A question popped into her head clearly. "Why do they want to destroy the London security simulation?" Jonathan took a deep breath. "We're not sure of all the motives yet, but there is this," he said slowly. "Tomorrow at the European Aviation Security Conference, Aegis is going to present the Avalon Defense Grid Model, right?" Amara nodded, though he couldn't see. "Correct." A heavy silence. "Miss Lewis, if Avalon is passed, it will completely change the way Europe handles high-frequency security." Amara understood immediately. If Avalon were to be incorporated into the system, many old facilities would be replaced. Many groups with vested interests in the old model would lose power, and the group that opposed Amara's technology would be completely wiped out. She said, "They want to take down Avalon." "Before Avalon even launches," Jonathan replied. "Yes. And the worst thing is, they've already started." Amara slowly sat down in her chair, her hands clenched. Last night's pieces, the seed incident, the thrown backpack, the stranger appearing in Newark were not all isolated events. It was a deliberate plan to sabotage her right before the conference. Amara looked out the window. London glittered in the rain, but her eyes now held only warning. She said to Jonathan, "I will not run away, and I will not let them bring down Avalon." Jonathan was silent for a few seconds. Then he said something that made her understand that her battle had just entered a new phase. "Miss Lewis, from this moment on, we need more than a CEO. We need someone who sees the picture that others miss." Amara took a deep breath. She felt the weight on her shoulders increasing little by little, but also felt the power within her rising as strong as the sound of an airplane engine in the night. She said, "Okay, tonight, we begin our counterattack." Amara did not sleep that night. She knew well the most important battles were not fought on the ground, but in the decisions made by commanders before the sun rose. Around 11 p.m., she sat alone by the window. London was still awake, the lights from the buildings reflected off the thin layer of fog, making the city seem to breathe. She frowned as she thought about the data Jonathan had provided, the attack sequences, the interferograms, the targeted security simulations. They all pointed to one thing: Avalon Defense Grid, her brainchild, something she spent 4 years creating, a system that could change global aviation security standards. She knew Avalon would be controversial, but she didn't expect someone to want to wipe it out. There was a very light knock on the door. She didn't flinch. She just stood up, walked over, and unlocked the door. Agent Andrew Reese, who had been assigned to protect her by Jonathan since she arrived in London, stood outside the door. His jacket was still wet from the rain, his face worried, but trying to remain calm. "Miss Lewis," he said softly, "I have news. It is urgent." Amara invited him in. Andrew opened his security tablet, bringing up a video clip from a traffic camera near Canary Wharf subway station. A man in a dark hoodie walked quickly as if trying to avoid being followed. His face was only visible for a second, but that 1 second was enough. Amara let out a small sigh. "Elegant," she said softly, almost in a whisper. Andrew looked at her. "Do you recognize him?" Amara nodded slowly. He was the first person to try to break into the Aegis system 2 years ago. It caused us to upgrade all our security protocols. The name on internal records is Lloyd Mercer. Andrew opened his eyes wide. Lloyd Mercer, the hacker who worked for the defense agency and disappeared after Harbor 12. "Correct?" Amara stared at the blurry image on the screen. "If he himself appears in London, it means they are entering the final stages of their plan." Andrew swallowed. "And since you're the one presenting Avalon tomorrow morning, they won't let you step onto the stage safely." Amara was silent for a few seconds. Then she said in a low, steady voice, "They don't understand the most important thing," Andrew asked. What Amara turned to look straight at him. "I am not afraid of them." Around midnight, Amara changed into comfortable gym clothes, put on her shoes, and put on her headphones. She walked into the small gym on the 19th floor, a place with only a row of dim lights, a large window overlooking the city, and no one in sight. She started running on the treadmill, steady but slow. She wasn't running for strength. She was running to clear her mind, to control her breathing, just like when she was in college in Detroit, running every night to escape the fatigue and the stairs. In the steady footsteps, she wondered, why didn't they attack the Aegis system directly? Why did they choose to disrupt the global security simulation? She turned on some soft music, but her mind was still digging. Suddenly, she remembered a small detail in the data Jonathan sent. One of the simulated data transmission stations is located near London Heathrow, and that station is being upgraded to Avalon standard. She stopped the machine. She wasn't breathing heavily, but her heart was racing. Oh my God, they want to destroy the Avalon test station. If they broke that station, the night before launch she'd be forced to delay Avalon's launch. No one would dare approve a project when there were problems, and Avalon would die young. She immediately got off the treadmill and called Jonathan. He picked up the phone very quickly, even though it was already 12:12. "What did you notice?" Amara said bluntly. "You must send someone to the Avalon testing station immediately. They will attack tonight." Jonathan was silent for exactly 2 seconds, then reacted exactly as she expected. "I'll send a special team. Thank you. This could save the show tomorrow morning." Amara nodded slightly, but her heart did not lighten, because she knows a group capable of attacking the simulation station wouldn't just hit one spot. Around 1 a.m., Amara returned to her room. She took her laptop to the balcony, sat down on the couch, and wrapped herself in a blanket to keep out the night wind. The cold London wind blew against her face, but it cleared her mind. She opened all the data again. The enemy was not stupid. If they knew the system was protected, they would change their target. What are they trying to hit that Avalon needs most? Then, very slowly but very clearly, a strange thought appeared. Not technology, not data, but Amara's reputation. If she falls, they win. If she loses the Conclave's trust, Avalon dies. The wind blew strongly. Her hair swayed slightly. She hugged her arms to her chest, her heart filled with an indescribable feeling. Not fear, not anger, but responsibility. She whispered, "Dad, I understand. This isn't personal anymore." Amara closed her eyes. The words her father had said to her when she was 12 years old echoed again Amara. True power is not winning in front of everyone, but winning when no one knows you are fighting. She opened her eyes, and then she heard a small sound from the door, like shoes on carpet. Amara stood up and walked inside. The door was closed, but unlocked. She sensed someone outside. She didn't turn on the light. She stood still, watching every movement. 1 second, then 2 seconds. The sound of metal clanking lightly on the doorknob. Amara took a half step back, her heart racing, but she remained calm. The door opened slowly, and Andrew walked in. He breathed heavily. "Miss Lewis, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you." Amara relaxes. "What's the matter?" Andrew nodded quickly. Jonathan's team just arrived at the Avalon testing station. But, Amara crossed her arms, but what Andrew swallowed, they found signs that someone had entered the station before, and they found a device attached to the backup server. Amara frowned. "What device?" Andrew replied, "A jamming module programmed to activate. At 9:00 tomorrow morning." Amara clenched her fists. 9:00, exactly an hour before her presentation. Andrew continued, "If that module is not removed in time, the Avalon simulation at the conference will have corrupted data. The presentation will fail." Amara closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them. She didn't panic. She didn't tremble. It was like a switch in her mind had flipped. She said, "So now we don't have much time." Andrew looked at her, hesitant. "Miss Lewis, you can cancel your speech tomorrow morning. Postpone it. Pending review. No one will blame you." Amara looked straight at him. Her voice was low but steely. "No. If I take 1 step back, they will take 10 steps forward, and Avalon will never be launched." She walked back to the table and got her coat. "We're going to the Avalon test site tonight." Andrew opened his eyes wide. "You want to come in person? The risk is too great." Amara buttoned her shirt and tied her hair back in a ponytail, and smiled lightly, but determinedly. "Andrew, Avalon is mine. No one knows it better than I do. No one can protect it better than I can." She locked the door and went straight out into the hallway. Her voice rang out, calm but powerful. They chose to attack tonight. She turned her head to look at Andrew. "But tonight is also the time for me to counterattack." Amara Lewis's story is more than just a seat dispute. It's a mirror of something deeper in society, how we judge people by their appearance, how privilege operates in the smallest moments, and how an individual can choose to stand up rather than be held back. Amara's most valuable trait isn't her power or her wealth, it's her composure. When she's insulted or slighted, she doesn't react in a violent way. She uses her wits, her law, and her composure to defend herself. It's a very real-life lesson. Sometimes strength isn't about screaming. It's about being able to maintain peace of mind, even when everything around her is chaotic. The story also reminds us that each of us deserves respect. whether at the airport, on the bus, or in the conference room. When you respect yourself, you force others to respect you. And when you stay calm enough to handle an unfair situation, you don't just protect yourself, you open the door for others to be treated better. Most importantly, don't judge anyone by the clothes they wear or the color of their skin. Life is fragile and complicated enough that we need kindness, not prejudice. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. I hope it touches you, as it has touched so many. If you found value, empathy, or a little hope in it, please leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel to join us in the next powerful stories. See you in the next video.